She was just a junior analyst, invisible in a sea of cubicles, until one coffee shop confession changed everything. What she didn't know? The stranger listening was her billionaire CEO. Hello, my friends. Before we begin this amazing story, leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and how your day is going, all right? And don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. The lukewarm coffee tasted of bitter almonds and profound disappointment, a flavor Jane Reed had become intimately familiar with. She stared out the rain-streaked window of the cramped downtown Austin cafe, watching the afternoon sky weep onto the bustling streets of South Congress. The city smell of wet asphalt and damp earth mingled with the aroma of roasting coffee beans, a combination that usually felt like home, but today only served to deepen her melancholy. On the small, wobbly table before her, her phone lit up with a cheerful ding that felt like a tiny, personal insult. It was another mass email from Sterling Innovations' Corporate Communications Department. "We value your synergy and forward-thinking contributions," it read, a generic platitude that was as empty as the promises of a politician. She let out a short, humorless snort, swirling the dregs of her latte in its ceramic cup. "Synergy," she muttered into the foam. "My boss, the great and powerful phantom Mr. Sterling, wouldn't know synergy if it bit him in his billion-dollar backside. He probably thinks it's a new cryptocurrency he can invest in from his ivory tower." She spoke with the quiet fury of the perpetually overlooked, a simmering resentment that had become the background radiation of her professional life. In her mind's eye, she pictured him, a faceless monolith of a man, surrounded by chrome and glass, approving another soulless product nobody actually wanted or needed. She didn't notice the man at the adjacent table, previously hidden behind the crisp pages of the Wall Street Journal, slowly lower his newspaper. His attention, once on stock market fluctuations, was now entirely captivated by the young woman's passionate, whispered tirade. Jane, oblivious, continued her venting session with the dregs of her coffee. "He wants disruptive ideas. That's the corporate buzzword of the month, disruptive ideas. Meanwhile, my team has been pushing the exact same stale marketing demographics for the Sterling Nexus project for 5 years straight. It's like they're actively trying to fail. I have ideas, real ones that could actually work, that could connect with people on a human level instead of treating them like walking wallets." She pressed the heels of her hands into her temples, a dull ache beginning to form behind her eyes. It was the familiar throb of unspent potential. "I can see it in the data. The numbers are screaming a story that nobody in management is willing to hear. They see spreadsheets. I see desires, frustrations, needs. But I'm just a cog in the machine, Jane." Reed, junior analyst, the one they asked to format the PowerPoint slides after the real decisions have already been made by people who haven't spoken to an actual customer in a decade. A heavy sigh escaped her lips, carrying the weight of her student loans, her sister's impending college tuition, and the crushing burden of being brilliant in a room where no one was looking. "God," she whispered, her voice cracking with a sudden, sharp pang of desperation. "I just wish for one single day he could see what it's really like down here in the trenches. Maybe then he'd understand." A calm, deep voice spoke from beside her, so unexpectedly that it made her jump, splashing a bit of cold coffee onto her hand. "What's it really like?" The man had folded his newspaper and placed it neatly on his table. He wasn't what she'd expected of an eavesdropper. He was dressed in a simple, well-fitted grey sweater and dark jeans, nothing that screamed tech elite. Yet there was an unmistakable air of quiet confidence about him, a stillness that seemed at odds with the frantic energy of the cafe. His eyes, a surprising shade of hazel, regarded her with a look of genuine, unnerving curiosity. Jane felt a hot flush of embarrassment creep up her neck. She'd been so lost in her own storm of frustration that she'd forgotten she was in a public place. I'm sorry," she stammered, fumbling for a napkin to wipe her hand. "I was just thinking out loud. A bad habit." The stranger offered a faint, almost imperceptible smile. It didn't quite reach his eyes, which remained serious, analytical. It sounded like more than just thinking. It sounded like you have a clear vision of the problem. He pressed gently, his voice a low baritone that commanded attention without demanding it. You said you have ideas, real ones. You said the data is telling a story. If you were the CEO, if you were Mr. Sterling for a day, what would you do differently? The question hung in the air between them, sharp and direct, slicing through her embarrassment and hitting something deeper. It wasn't a question of idle curiosity, it was a challenge. And Jane Reed, for all her frustrations, had never been one to back down from a challenge. The moment stretched, thick with the unspoken gravity of his question. Jane studied him, really looked at him for the first time. He had a strong jaw, lightly dusted with the shadow of a day's worth of beard growth, and dark hair that fell with a casual sort of precision. Across his forehead, he looked to be in his early 30s, and there was a weariness in his gaze that she recognized, the look of someone who carried a heavy weight. But beneath it, there was an intensity, a focus that was now aimed squarely at her. All her instincts screamed that this was a bad idea, that she was complaining about her job to a complete stranger who could be anyone. Yet, the dam of her professional restraint had already been broken, and the flood of her long-suppressed opinions was rushing to get out. Differently, she began, her voice gaining strength as the words found their shape. For a start, I'd kill the current Nexus campaign. It's a complete failure. We're marketing a device meant to simplify people's lives by using jargon that makes it sound like a piece of military hardware. We're targeting affluent men over 40, but the data shows the real interest, the organic buzz, is coming from female college students and young professionals who are desperate for tools to manage their chaotic schedules. We're selling features when we should be selling a feeling, the feeling of being in control of your own life. She was leaning forward now, her earlier embarrassment forgotten, replaced by the fervor of her conviction. I'd scrap the focus groups filled with yes men. I'd go to places like this, to college campuses, to co-working spaces. I'd listen. I would use the terabytes of user data we're sitting on, not to manipulate people into buying something, but to understand what they're actually missing and then build that for them. Sterling Innovations was founded on the principle of human-centered design, but it's become a company that centers everything on profit margins and shareholder reports. It's lost its soul. The man listened without interruption, his expression unreadable, but his attention absolute. He didn't nod or offer platitudes, he simply absorbed her words, his hazel eyes searching hers as if trying to see the data she was describing. When she finally ran out of breath, a silence settled over their small corner of the cafe, broken only by the hiss of the espresso machine and the gentle drumming of rain against the glass. Jane's heart was pounding. She had just revealed more of her professional soul to this stranger than she had ever dared to in a single team meeting. A wave of regret washed over her. She was a fool, a reckless, impulsive fool who was about to be late, getting back to the very job she had just so thoroughly trashed. Look, I should go, she said abruptly, gathering her bag and phone. I have no idea why I just unloaded all of that on you. You must think I'm crazy. He finally blinked, the spell of his intense focus momentarily broken. I don't think you're crazy, he said, his voice even and measured. I think you're frustrated, and I think you might be right. He reached into the pocket of his jacket, pulling out a slim leather wallet, and placed a $20 bill on his table. More than enough to cover his own coffee. He stood up, his height surprising her. He was well over 6 feet, with the lean, athletic build that his simple clothes had concealed. Thank you for the coffee, he said, gesturing vaguely toward her cup. And for the consultation. With a final, enigmatic look, he turned and walked out of the cafe, disappearing into the grey, rain-soaked afternoon, leaving Jane standing in a state of bewildered shock, the echo of his final question still ringing in her ears. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of mundane tasks and gnawing anxiety. Back in the sterile, glass and steel confines of Sterling Innovations headquarters in the Domain, Jane tried to focus on her work, but her mind kept replaying the conversation in the cafe. Who was that man? Why had he seemed so interested? She tried to dismiss it as a random, weird Austin encounter, but the intensity of his gaze was hard to forget. The corporate environment felt more suffocating than ever. She sat in her cubicle, one of 100 identical grey boxes, and stared at her slightly chipped caffeine and confidence mug, a gift from her younger sister, Lily. It felt like a mockery today. She had the caffeine, but her confidence was a flickering candle in a hurricane. She could hear the smug voice of her department head, Mark, droning on from a nearby conference room about leveraging core competencies and optimizing workflow paradigms. It was a language designed to say nothing while sounding important, the antithesis of the raw, honest truth she had spewed to the stranger. Her own contributions that day consisted of recalibrating color schemes on a pie chart that no one would understand anyway. She felt like a ghost haunting the halls of her own career, invisible and unheard. As the clock mercifully ticked towards 5, a new email landed in her inbox, its arrival marked by the same cheerful ding from the cafe. This one, however, was not from corporate communications. The UB sender was from Human Resources. The subject line consisted of 3 chilling words: urgent, meeting with CEO. Panic, cold and absolute, seized her. Her blood ran cold, and the air in her lungs seemed to turn to ice. This was it. Someone must have overheard her. Maybe the man from the cafe worked here. Maybe he'd reported her for insubordination, for her blatant disrespect of the company and its revered leader. Her mind raced through a catastrophic slideshow of consequences. Termination, a black mark on her record, the immediate and terrifying inability to pay next month's rent or the next installment of Lily's tuition. Lily was her everything, the brilliant, hopeful future of their small, fractured family since their parents' passing. Jane was the sole provider, the safety net, the one who had promised their parents she would see Lily through college no matter what. The weight of that promise felt like a physical stone in her stomach. With trembling hands, she replied to the email confirming her availability. The response was immediate. "Mr. Sterling will see you now, 48th floor." The 48th floor, the top floor, the executive level where mortals like her never ventured. It was often referred to by the lower-level employees as the cloud, a place as remote and intangible as the heavens. Her walk from the elevator to the CEO's office suite felt like the final mile of a condemned prisoner. The plush carpet absorbed the sound of her frantic footsteps. The air was different up here, still and rarefied, smelling faintly of expensive leather and clean filtered air. A severe-looking executive assistant with a headset nodded her toward a set of imposing double doors made of dark, polished wood. "Mr. Sterling is waiting." She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The office was vast and minimalist, with a floor-to-ceiling window that offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the Austin skyline, the city lights just beginning to twinkle against the bruised purple of the twilight sky. The space was dominated by a single massive desk of dark wood, upon which sat nothing but a sleek laptop and a small vintage leather-bound journal. And standing by the window, his back to her, was a man in a simple grey sweater and dark jeans. He turned slowly and the world tilted on its axis. It was him, the man from the cafe, the stranger who had listened to her treasonous rant with such unnerving focus. He wasn't an employee who had reported her. He was the subject of her vitriol. He was the phantom himself, John Sterling. A wave of nausea and dizziness washed over Jane, and she had to grip the back of a chair to steady herself. His expression was just as calm and unreadable as it had been hours earlier, but now, in the context of this room, his quiet confidence looked like what it was: absolute power. "Ms. Reed," he said, his voice the same deep baritone that had startled her in the cafe. "Please, have a seat. Thank you for coming up on such short notice." Jane couldn't feel her legs as she moved to sit in one of the two chairs positioned opposite his desk. Her mind was a maelstrom of confusion and terror. She tried to form an apology, an explanation, anything, but her throat was tight with unshed panic. He seemed to sense her turmoil as he didn't sit down immediately but remained standing by the window, giving her a moment. "I believe we've already met," he said, the corner of his mouth twitching with that same faint, unsmiling expression. "You were providing some rather insightful feedback on our flagship product, the Sterling Nexus." The word feedback was laced with a dry irony that made Jane's stomach clench. "Mr. Sterling," she finally managed to choke out, her voice a strained whisper. "I'm so incredibly sorry. I had no idea who you were. What I said was unprofessional and completely out of line. I was having a bad day and—" He held up a hand, cutting her off gently. "Please, Ms. Reed, don't apologize. An apology would imply you were wrong. And the most infuriating thing about our conversation this afternoon is that I believe you were right. About all of it." He walked over to his desk, picked up the leather-bound journal, and held it for a moment, his thumb stroking the worn cover. "This belonged to my father. He founded this company with one simple idea: use technology to solve real human problems. He wrote that on the first page. I've been reading it a lot lately because I fear we've lost our way. We've become the very thing he despised, a corporation that listens only to itself." He finally sat down, his gaze locking with hers across the vast expanse of the desk. The analytical intensity was back, but now it was mixed with something else, a hint of desperation. "The Sterling Nexus project is failing. It's over budget, behind schedule, and the internal reports I get are nothing but sanitized corporate nonsense. They tell me everything is fine while the data, our data, is telling a story of catastrophic failure. A story that until today, it seems only one person in this entire company had the courage to actually read and understand." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush. "I spent the last 2 hours reviewing your employee file. Your performance reviews are average, but your data analysis reports are anything but. You have a knack for finding the human narrative within the numbers. You see the why behind the what. That's a rare skill, Ms. Reed. A skill that is being utterly wasted formatting PowerPoint slides." Jane could only stare, dumbfounded. This was not the conversation she had anticipated. She had prepared for termination, not a performance review from the CEO himself. He was not the faceless monolith she had imagined. He was a man, a tired and worried man, who seemed just as trapped by the company as she was, albeit in a much larger, more luxurious cage. "I'm in a difficult position," he continued, his voice low and serious. "I'm surrounded by senior executives like Harrison Vance, who have been here for decades. They are loyal to my father's memory, but they are resistant to change. They tell me what they think I want to hear. If I make a drastic move, like killing the Nexus project, the board will see it as a sign of weakness, of incompetence. They'll say I'm not ready to lead. But if I let it launch as is, it will be a disaster that could seriously damage this company's reputation and future." He paused, letting the weight of his dilemma settle in the room. "Which is why I've called you here. I need something that no one else on the 48th floor can give me. I need the truth, unfiltered, brutal, the kind of truth you were serving up for free this afternoon in a coffee shop." He interlaced his fingers on the desk, his expression now one of sheer, calculated risk. "I have a proposition for you, Ms. Reed. An unconventional one. I want to hire you as a consultant, a secret consultant. Your official title and duties as a junior data analyst will remain unchanged. To everyone in this building, especially your own team, you will be exactly who you are now." The air in the room grew thick with the audacity of his proposal. Jane felt a dizzying sense of unreality, as if she had stepped through a looking glass into a world where corporate rules were inverted. She was no longer a lowly analyst on the verge of being fired. She was being offered a secret role at the right hand of the CEO. A secret consultant, she repeated, the words feeling foreign and absurd on her tongue. What would that even entail? John's expression became even more intense. "It would entail you telling me exactly what you think, without any corporate filter. You would have access to all the raw data for the Nexus project, user feedback, market analysis, internal testing results. You and I will meet after hours and off-site, and you will give me your brutally honest assessment. You will tell me the story the data is screaming. And based on your insights, you and I, will secretly reshape this project from the ground up. We will turn it into something that people actually want, something that honors the founding principles of this company." He named a figure, a bonus that would be paid to her directly from his personal account upon the project's successful relaunch. The number was staggering. It wasn't just enough to cover Lily's tuition for 1 year, it was enough for all 4. It was life-changing. Money. It was freedom. The offer was a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman, but it was tangled with ropes of immense risk. "Why me?" Jane asked, her voice barely a whisper. "You could hire any top-tier consulting firm in the country to do this. Because they would give me the same polished, sanitized reports I already get," he countered instantly. "They would tell me how to maximize profit. You, Ms. Reed, told me the company had lost its soul. I don't need a consultant. I need a conscience. I need the person who sits in the trenches." He laid out the rules of their potential arrangement with stark clarity, his voice leaving no room for misunderstanding. Rule number 1. At the office, in this building, we are nothing more than CEO and junior analyst. We do not speak, we do not acknowledge each other beyond what is professionally required. Any interaction could raise suspicion. Rule number 2. Your feedback to me must be 100% unfiltered, no matter how harsh it is or whose decisions it criticizes. The moment you start trying to spare my feelings is the moment this arrangement becomes useless. Rule number 3. All of our meetings will happen outside of this building, after business hours. No emails, no texts, no digital trail of any kind. Complete secrecy is paramount. And rule number 4, the most important one, no one can ever know. Not your friends, not your sister, and certainly not anyone at this company. If Harrison Vance or anyone on the board got wind of this, they would tear us both apart. They'd paint you as an opportunist and me as an incompetent leader being manipulated by a junior employee. We would both be finished. He leaned back in his chair, the offer laid bare between them, a glittering, dangerous temptation. The silence in the room was absolute, a vacuum waiting for her decision. He had given her an impossible choice, to remain a voiceless cog in a machine she despised, or to take a terrifying leap of faith that could either be the key to her liberation or the cause of her utter destruction. His hazel eyes watched her, waiting, his expression a perfect mask of professional neutrality. "So, Ms. Reed?" he asked, his voice calm and even, betraying none of the high-stakes tension that crackled in the air. "Do we have a deal?" The question hung in the opulent, silent air of the 48th floor, a single, shimmering thread upon which Jane Reed's entire future was precariously balanced. Her mind, a whirlwind of terror and exhilaration, raced to calculate the variables of an impossible equation. On one side was the certainty of her current existence, the quiet desperation, the slow professional death by 1,000 paper cuts, the constant grinding anxiety of financial insecurity. On the other was a leap into a terrifying unknown, a secret world of immense risk, high-stakes deception, and the kind of money that could finally, definitively, sever the chains of debt and worry that had bound her since her parents' death. But it wasn't just the money. It was the intoxicating, terrifying possibility of being heard. It was the chance to prove that the voice she had suppressed for so long was not only valid, but valuable. She thought of her sister, Lily, of her bright, hopeful face on their last video call, full of excitement about her dream of studying architecture. It was for that face, for that future, that Jane had endured so much. And it was for her that she would now risk everything. Her gaze met John, Sterling's across the desk, her fear solidifying into a cold, hard resolve. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and steady, betraying none of the chaos churning within her. "We have a deal." A flicker of something, relief perhaps, passed through John's carefully composed features before being swiftly suppressed. He gave a single decisive nod. The transition back to the detached CEO was instantaneous and slightly jarring. "Good," he stated, his tone all business. "The first payment of your bonus will be wired to an account that we will set up for you. It will be routed through a private holding company to ensure absolute discretion. I'll also provide you with a dedicated encrypted communication device. We will never use company email or our personal phones." He moved with an efficiency that was both impressive and intimidating, retrieving a small, sleek black box from a drawer in his desk. He slid it across the polished wood surface. "This is for you. It's programmed with only one number, mine. Use it to text me your availability for our first meeting. I suggest tomorrow night." The weight of the small phone in her hand felt immense, a tangible symbol of the secret pact she had just made. The walk out of his office and back down to the mundane world of the 23rd floor was the most surreal experience of her life. She passed co-workers in the hallway who offered tired end-of-day greetings, completely oblivious to the fact that she was no longer just one of them. She was a spy in her own life, a secret agent of truth in a kingdom of corporate platitudes. Their first secret meeting took place not in a cozy cafe, but in the sterile, silent atmosphere of a private study room in the University of Texas Library, a place of determined quiet and implicit anonymity. The air smelled of old paper and dust, a stark contrast to the filtered, scentless air of Sterling Innovations. John was already there when she arrived, dressed again in unassuming casual clothes, a laptop open. In front of him, the vintage leather journal beside it. He looked like a graduate student cramming for his finals, not a billionaire CEO orchestrating a corporate coup. "Thank you for coming," he began, his voice a low murmur that barely disturbed the profound silence of the library. "I've given you top-level clearance to the Nexus data stream. Everything, every internal memo, every piece of raw user feedback, every single line of code from the beta tests. For the next 3 hours, they didn't speak of their strange arrangement or the risks involved. They spoke the language of data." Jane, armed with a powerful new laptop he provided, dove into the digital ocean of information. And for the first time in her professional life, she was allowed to swim freely. The story the numbers told was even worse than she had imagined. It wasn't just a story of a misguided marketing campaign. It was a tale of deep, systemic dysfunction. The hardware team wasn't communicating with the software team. The user feedback was being systematically ignored and reinterpreted by marketing managers to fit a narrative of success. She worked with a fierce, focused intensity that John watched with growing astonishment. She moved through complex databases with the grace of a dancer, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She didn't just read the numbers, she interrogated them, cross-referencing disparate datasets to uncover hidden correlations. "Here," she said, her voice sharp with discovery as she turned the laptop toward him. "This is the problem. The design is arrogant." John raised an eyebrow. arrogant. Completely, she confirmed, not backing down. Look at the user interface. It's designed to be intuitive by a team of engineers who think everyone has the same level of technical literacy as they do. But the feedback from the beta testers, the ones who aren't on the payroll, is a litany of confusion and frustration. This device is supposed to simplify your life, but it requires you to learn an entirely new digital language to use it. It assumes the user will change their entire routine to fit the device, not the other way around. That's not human-centered design. That's corporate ego. Her words were blunt, a direct assault on the work of his highly paid senior executives. She watched him for any sign of defensiveness, of the CEO ego taking offense. Instead, she saw him open his father's journal and make a note, his expression one of grim validation. He wasn't just listening, he was learning. And in that moment, Jane felt a thrill that had nothing to do with the money. It was the intoxicating thrill of being truly, profoundly respected. Their clandestine meetings soon developed a rhythm, a secret cadence set against the backdrop of Austin's sprawling cityscape. They convened in the quiet corners of the city, places where they could blend in and disappear. A deserted university lecture hall late at night, a booth in a 24-hour diner on the edge of town, and, once on a clear night, the windy observation deck of the 360 bridge, the city lights a glittering tapestry below them. It was during a session at a cozy independent bookstore cafe in her own South Congress neighborhood, her turf, that the rigid professional lines they had drawn began to blur. Surrounded by the comforting scent of books and brewing tea, the dynamic between them shifted. The sterile tension of their earlier meetings gave way to a more comfortable, collaborative energy. They were deep in a debate over a proposed feature, a biometric scanner that John's security team was pushing for. "It's a solution in search of a problem, John," Jane argued, pushing a stray strand of hair from her face. "Our target user isn't trying to protect state secrets. She's a mom trying to coordinate her family's schedule while juggling a freelance career. She needs simplicity, not a feature that makes her feel like she's breaking into Fort Knox every time she wants to check her grocery list." John countered, "But security is a major selling point. Our brand is built on reliability, on trust. Trust isn't about unbreakable encryption, not for this product," she shot back, her passion overriding her sense of professional distance. "It's about trusting that the device will work when you need it. It's about trusting that it won't add more stress to your already stressful life. It's about trusting the company to listen. That's the trust you've broken, and that's what we have to earn back." Their debates were fierce. Intellectual battles waged over spreadsheets and user experience mock-ups, but they were underpinned by a growing, undeniable current of mutual respect. He was consistently impressed by the depth of her empathy, by her almost supernatural ability to channel the voice of the consumer. She, in turn, began to see past the armor of the reclusive billionaire. She saw the man who was desperately trying to honor his father's legacy, a man who felt the crushing weight of thousands of employees' livelihoods on his shoulders. One evening, as they were packing up, he confessed, "My father used to say that the moment you stop being your own toughest critic is the moment you start to fail. I haven't had a tough critic in years, just a room full of people who agree with whatever I say." He looked down at the worn journal in his hands, a rare moment of vulnerability, exposing the loneliness of his position. "Until now," he added, his gaze lifting to meet hers. The words hung in the air, simple and sincere, and Jane felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the hot tea she was drinking. This was more dangerous than any corporate exposé. The clear, defined roles of CEO and consultant were dissolving, leaving something far more complicated and uncharted in their place. The tension of their secret became a shared intimacy, a world built for two that existed only in the shadows of their public lives. The strain of this dual existence, was a constant humming wire of anxiety for Jane. At the office, she was forced to be a silent observer in meetings where Harrison Vance, the smug senior vice president of product, would present a new slide deck for the Nexus, filled with the very same flawed logic and arrogant assumptions she had spent the previous night eviscerating for John. Vance, a man who oozed the easy confidence of someone who had never been told no, would praise the project's supposed strengths, oblivious to the fact that the company's CEO was secretly plotting its complete overhaul, based on the insights of a junior analyst sitting quietly in the back of the room. During one particularly excruciating boardroom meeting, Harrison was waxing poetic about the genius of the biometric scanner. "This feature will be our key differentiator," he declared, beaming at the other executives. "It speaks to our core values of security and innovation." Jane had to physically bite the inside of her cheek to keep from screaming. Her eyes involuntarily flickered toward the head of the table where John sat, his face an unreadable mask of corporate neutrality. For a fraction of a second, his gaze met hers across the long, polished table. It was a minuscule breach of their first and most important rule, a flicker of shared frustration so fleeting that no one else could have possibly noticed. But in that split-second connection, a silent message was exchanged. "I see you. I know this is torture. Just hold on." The secret they shared was no longer just a business arrangement. It was a bond, a silent alliance against the world. The ultimate test of their arrangement came when the entire executive and product development team flew to Las Vegas for the annual Consumer Technology Summit, the biggest tech conference of the year. The atmosphere was a chaotic whirlwind of flashing lights, relentless networking, and palpable corporate pressure. Here, in the full glare of the industry spotlight, John was the celebrated tech visionary, and Jane was a nameless junior analyst, tasked with taking notes and fetching coffee. They were forced to inhabit the same crowded convention halls and hotel lobbies, moving as strangers in orbits that could not be seen to intersect. The illusion was nearly shattered during John's keynote address. He was midway through his presentation when a notoriously sharp journalist from Wired cornered him during the Q&A session. "Mr. Sterling," she began, her voice amplified. "Throughout the massive auditorium, your competitor just announced the Aura, a device with a remarkably similar function to the Nexus, but with a focus on adaptive learning and user simplicity. Given Sterling's recent struggles with consumer connection, how can you convince us that the Nexus isn't just another piece of overly engineered out-of-touch hardware?" A hush fell over the crowd. It was a brutal, direct hit, and it referenced the very competitor whose data Jane had been analyzing for weeks. John's PR team, flanking the stage, looked panicked. He paused, the silence stretching uncomfortably. Jane, standing in the back of the auditorium, felt her heart hammer against her ribs. She saw his hand go to his cuff, a nervous tell she now recognized. Acting on pure instinct, she pulled out the burner phone. Her thumbs flew across the screen, typing out a single, concise message born of all their late-night debates. "Don't sell the hardware. Sell the problem it solves. Tell them you're not selling a device, you're giving them back their time." On stage, under the heat of 1,000 lights, John's eyes subtly flickered down to the phone in his hand. A moment later, he looked back up at the journalist, a newfound calm settling over him. "That's a fair question," he began, his voice resonating with a sincerity that cut through the corporate gloss of the event. "And you're right, there are other devices out there. But we've become so obsessed with features, with processor speeds, and gigabytes, that we've forgotten the one resource that is truly finite for every single person on this planet: time. The Sterling Nexus isn't about the hardware. It's a tool designed to fight back against the chaos of modern life. We're not selling a piece of technology. We're trying to give people back an hour of their day, an hour to spend with their family, to read a book, to simply breathe. And you can't put a price on that." The answer was a masterstroke. It was honest, human, and, completely disarming, it reframed the entire conversation from technical specs to emotional benefit. A wave of spontaneous applause rippled through the auditorium. The crisis was averted. He had turned a direct attack into a triumphant articulation of a new, human-centric vision for his company. From the side of the stage, Harrison Vance watched John with a look of narrowed, calculating suspicion. He had seen John glance at his phone. He knew that answer hadn't come from any of their approved talking points. It was too good, too real, and his eyes began to scan the crowd, searching for a source. Later that evening, at a crowded corporate reception on a rooftop terrace overlooking the glittering expanse of the Las Vegas Strip, John found her. Jane was trying to make herself invisible near a towering potted plant, overwhelmed by the noise and the forced schmoozing. He materialized beside her, his presence creating a small pocket of silence in the surrounding chaos. "That was you, wasn't it?" he said, his voice low and close to her ear to be heard over the music, giving people back their time. She could only nod, her throat suddenly dry. The adrenaline from the keynote and the tension of their enforced separation had left her nerves frayed. "You saved me up there," he said, his voice laced with a raw gratitude that went far beyond their professional arrangement. "No, you saved yourself," she replied softly. "I just reminded you of what you already believed." He looked at her then, and the vast, glittering city behind them seemed to fade away. The invisible line that had separated them for weeks, the line between CEO and analyst, between boss and consultant, evaporated under the warm desert night. He saw not just the brilliant mind that was helping him save his company, but the passionate, courageous woman who had dared to speak truth to power in a quiet coffee shop. His hand came up, his fingers gently brushing a stray strand of hair from her cheek. The touch was electric, sending a jolt through her entire body. He leaned in, his eyes searching hers, and for a heart-stopping moment she was certain he was going to kiss her. The world narrowed to the few inches of space between their lips. "John? I thought that was you." The voice was smooth, polished, and sharp as glass, cutting through the moment like a knife. They sprang apart as if electrocuted. Standing there was a tall, impeccably dressed woman with an air of effortless authority. Her smile was bright but didn't reach her cool, assessing eyes, which flickered from John to Jane with undisguised curiosity. "Clarissa," John said, his voice a little too tight as he regained his composure. "I didn't know you were coming tonight." "The board felt it was important to show our support," she replied, her gaze lingering on Jane for a moment too long, a silent question in her eyes. "And who is your new friend?" The introduction was a minefield. John's mind raced, searching for the right words to define the undefinable relationship standing beside him. Jane felt a cold dread creep into her veins. Clarissa Fairchild was not just any woman. She was a senior board member at Sterling Innovations. And, as a quick and panicked mental search of the company's gossip mill informed her, she was also John Sterling's very recent and very powerful ex-girlfriend. The charged, victorious moment was gone, replaced by the cold, hard reality of their impossible situation. They were standing on a precipice, and the ground was crumbling beneath their feet. The flight back to Austin was thick with an unspoken tension. The near kiss and Clarissa's sudden appearance had shattered the delicate equilibrium of their secret world. Their next meeting, held in the impersonal quiet of a rented office space, was stilted and awkward. They tried to focus on the data, on the next phase of the Nexus redesign, but the memory of that rooftop moment, of what almost happened, lay between them like a physical object. They were both acutely aware that something had irrevocably shifted. The rules had not just been bent, they had been broken. The danger they were in was no longer a theoretical risk, but a palpable threat, personified by the coolly observant gaze of a woman on the board of directors. For Harrison Vance, the Las Vegas conference had been a catalyst. He was a creature of the corporate world, a man who understood power, and he sensed a shift in its currents. John's brilliant, off-the-cuff answer had been too perfect, and his brief, intense interaction with a junior analyst on a crowded rooftop had not gone unnoticed by others. Harrison's jealousy, stoked by his belief that John was an unworthy heir, squandering his father's legacy, now hardened into a dangerous suspicion. He returned to Austin with a new, singular purpose: to find the source of John's newfound inspiration and to use it to destroy him. He summoned his executive assistant, a young, ambitious man named Peterson, who was fiercely loyal and eager to climb the corporate ladder. "Peterson," Harrison began, his voice smooth and confiding as he stared out his office window, his gaze fixed on the distant top floor of the building. "I need you to do something for me, off the books." He turned, a predatory smile playing on his lips. "I'm concerned about our CEO. His behavior has been erratic lately. I want you to keep an eye on his after-hours activities. Be discreet. I also want you to find out everything you can about one of our junior analysts, a woman named Jane Reed, her background, her financials, her associations. I have a feeling she's become a significant person of interest." Peterson simply nodded, his expression revealing nothing but quiet competence. The gears of the corporate machine, so often used to build products, were now being repurposed for destruction. A few days later, Jane was at home in her small South Congress apartment, trying to decompress after a grueling day of feigned ignorance at the office. She was staring at a spreadsheet outlining the final payments for Lily's first-year tuition, a bill that, thanks to John's first wire transfer, was no longer a source of panic. It should have been a moment of triumph, but her mind was clouded with the memory of the near kiss and the growing fear of exposure. Her burner phone, the one she kept hidden in a shoebox at the back of her closet, suddenly buzzed. It was a number she didn't recognize. A knot of ice formed in her stomach. With trembling fingers, she opened the message. It was a photograph, clearly taken from a distance with a powerful zoom lens. It was blurry, but the subjects were unmistakable. Her and John sitting across from each other in the booth of the 24-hour diner from one of their very first secret meetings. Below the image was a single, chilling word: careful. The single word on the screen, careful, was more terrifying than 1,000 threats. It was a quiet, insidious whisper of surveillance, a confirmation that her secret world had been breached. Jane's blood ran cold, the blurry photograph of her and John burning itself onto her retina. This was not a random wrong number. It was a surgical strike, designed to inflict maximum psychological terror. Her first instinct was a primal urge to hide, to delete the message, to throw the burner phone into the Colorado River and pretend the last few weeks had been a fever dream. But the image of Lily's hopeful face, the tangible reality of the paid tuition bill, and the newfound fragile strength she had discovered within herself, refused to let her retreat. She would not be intimidated back into the silent grey box of her former life. With fingers that still trembled, she used the secure device to send a single, urgent message to its only contact. "We have a problem. We've been compromised." Their emergency meeting was in the only place they could think of that felt secure: the cavernous, echoing shell of a parking garage late on a Sunday night. The air was cold and smelled of damp concrete and gasoline. John was leaning against a concrete pillar when she arrived, his face etched with a fury so cold it seemed to lower the temperature around him. He looked at the photo on her phone, his jaw tightening until a muscle bunched in his cheek. "Harrison," he growled, the name a curse. "It has to be. He's the only one with the motive and the lack of conscience to pull a stunt like this." His immediate reaction was fiercely protective. "This is over, Jane. Right now. I'm transferring the rest of your bonus tomorrow. You need to walk away from this. I can't ask you to take this kind of risk. I never should have." But Jane, who had spent the entire drive rehearsing this moment, shook her head, her fear now eclipsed by a defiant resolve. "No, she said, her voice echoing slightly in the empty garage. "That's what he wants. He wants me to run, so he can isolate you and prove you're just a reckless amateur who can't control his own company. If we stop now, he wins. All of this, all the work we've done, will have been for nothing." John stared at her, a look of conflicted astonishment on his face. He was seeing a transformation. The nervous, frustrated analyst from the coffee shop was gone, replaced by a resolute strategist who was unwilling to surrender. "Jane, he's playing a game you don't know the rules to," he warned, his voice softening with genuine concern. "He will try to ruin you." "Then let him try," she shot back, her chin held high. "We're too close. The nexus is almost ready. We have to see this through." Harrison Vance, however, was several moves ahead. The single photograph was just a warning shot. He had compiled a meticulously curated dossier of their secret meetings, a collection of long lens shots taken over several weeks. He skillfully edited the context out of every image, cropping the laptops, the spreadsheets, and the technical documents, leaving only what appeared to be a series of clandestine, romantic rendezvous. A late-night diner booth looked like an intimate date. A conversation in a public park was framed as a secret lover's tryst. He packaged this narrative of unprofessionalism and manipulation into an anonymous email and sent it directly to every member of the Sterling Innovations Ethics Board, making sure to copy Clarissa Fairchild. The insinuation was clear and poisonous. The brilliant new vision for the company's flagship product was not the result of legitimate work, but the product of an illicit affair between a manipulative junior employee and the emotionally compromised CEO she had wrapped around her finger. The fallout was brutally swift. 2 days later, while sitting at her desk trying to pretend that her world wasn't tilting off its axis, an email with a cold, impersonal header from HR landed in her inbox. Her heart stopped. She knew what it was before she even opened it. "Dear Ms. Reed," it began, "this letter is to inform you that you have been placed on immediate and indefinite suspension pending a formal inquiry into allegations of unprofessional conduct. Your network access and security clearance have been revoked. Your access badge has been deactivated. You are required to vacate the premises immediately." The finality of the words was like a physical blow. The world around her, the familiar hum of the office, the drone of her co-workers' conversations, all of it faded into a dull roar. She had been publicly and humiliatingly branded, excised from the system as efficiently as a virus. Her suspension was a descent into an isolating hell. She was a pariah. Her company-issued laptop was locked, her email account shuttered, her access to the data streams she had lived and breathed for weeks completely severed. Friends from work, people she had eaten lunch with every day for 2 years, sent her brief, panicked texts before going silent, clearly warned by management to cease all contact. She couldn't tell Lily what was happening, offering vague excuses about a special project that required her to work from home, the lie tasting like ash in her mouth. She was alone in her small apartment, trapped with the deafening silence and the crushing weight of her fears. The burner phone, her only connection to John, remained silent. Days bled into a week. She scanned the business news obsessively, searching for any mention of Sterling Innovations, of a CEO in trouble, but found nothing. The silence from him was the cruelest blow of all. She could only assume the worst, that he had been cornered, that he had chosen his empire over the junior analyst who had become a liability. The board had forced his hand, and he had folded. She felt like a fool, a pawn in a billionaire's game, who had naively believed she could become a queen. The lowest point came late one night, a week into her suspension. She was staring at her reflection in the dark screen of her television, seeing a ghost of the woman she had been just a month ago. The anger, when it finally came, was a cleansing fire. It burned away the hurt and the fear, leaving behind a core of pure, incandescent rage. Rage at Harrison for his cowardly betrayal, rage at the corporate system that enabled men like him, and rage at herself for almost believing that John's silence meant he had abandoned their vision. She realized then that her voice, the one she had fought so hard to reclaim, was still hers. It did not belong to John Sterling or his company. She had earned it. In that moment of defiant clarity, she made a decision. She would not go quietly. She would not let Harrison Vance's stolen, bastardized version of her work be the final word. She sat down at her personal computer, opened a secure file, and began to work. For 48 sleepless, caffeine-fueled hours, she poured every last ounce of her intellect, her passion, and her anger into creating the ultimate presentation for the Sterling Nexus. It was more than a slide deck, it was a manifesto. It was the culmination of every late-night debate, every data point, every human story she had uncovered. It was her soul on a spreadsheet. When she was finished, her hands shaking from exhaustion, she attached the file to a new encrypted email. She addressed it to John's personal non-company account, the one he had given her in case of a true emergency. She wrote no subject line, no message in the body. The work would speak for itself. It was a final act of defiance, a digital flare sent into the darkness. "This is what you're throwing away," it screamed. "This is who I am." And then, with a click that felt like a final goodbye, she hit send. The day of the Sterling Innovations annual product launch was a major media event, live-streamed to the entire tech world. From the solitude of her apartment, Jane watched on her laptop, a hollow feeling in the pit of her stomach. The auditorium was packed, the energy palpable. And then he walked onto the stage, Harrison Vance, his face glowing with smug reptilian triumph. He looked like a king taking possession of a stolen throne. He began his presentation, his voice smooth and confident as he unveiled the revolutionary new Sterling Nexus. But as the features flashed across the giant screen behind him, Jane felt sick. It was her work, but it had been stripped of its heart. He had taken all of their ideas, the simplified interface, the focus on scheduling, the human-centric language, but he had twisted them, sanitizing them with corporate jargon and adding pointless, flashy features like the biometric scanner. It was a caricature of their vision, a hollow echo of the soul they had fought to breathe back into the machine. In the front row of the auditorium, John Sterling sat watching, his face a grim, unreadable mask. A moment earlier, his personal phone had vibrated in his pocket. He saw the notification, a single, large attachment from an encrypted address he recognized. He opened it. As Harrison's voice droned on about synergy and market disruption, John scrolled through Jane's manifesto. He saw the clarity of her vision, the unshakable integrity of her logic, the sheer, unadulterated brilliance of her work, untainted by fear or compromise. He looked from the truth on his phone to the lie being presented on stage, and in that instant, a decision was made. The CEO, the son, the man in the corporate armor, made a choice. John Sterling stood up and walked onto the stage. A wave of confusion rippled through the auditorium. Harrison Vance faltered mid-sentence, his confident smile freezing on his face. "John," he stammered, "I wasn't expecting you to—" "I'm sure you weren't," John said, his voice calm but carrying a lethal edge that cut through the silence. He turned to face the audience, the cameras, the entire world. "Ladies and gentlemen, I need to apologize. What you are seeing here today is a lie." Gasps swept through the room. Harrison's face went white. "This watered-down, committee-approved product is not the future of Sterling Innovations," John continued, his voice ringing with a newfound passionate authority. "It is a symptom of the disease that has been infecting this company for years, a culture of fear where conformity is rewarded and honest, disruptive ideas are buried." He turned his gaze on Harrison. "A culture that allows a senior executive to steal the work of a subordinate and present it as his own. The accusation, public and undeniable, hung in the air. The live stream cameras zoomed in on Harrison's horrified face. But John wasn't finished. He wasn't just there to expose a villain. He was there to celebrate a hero. For the past several weeks, John announced to the stunned audience, "I have been engaged in a confidential project to rediscover the soul of this company. I needed a voice that was not afraid to speak the truth, a mind that could see the human story inside our data. I found that voice in the most unexpected of places." He looked directly into the main broadcast camera, as if he could see right through the screen and into Jane's small apartment. "That voice belongs to a junior data analyst named Jane Reed." He said her name, and in that single moment, he rewrote the entire narrative. He took the shame and suspicion that had been heaped upon her and transformed it into a badge of honor. Ms. Reed, who was recently suspended based on a malicious and fabricated smear, in campaign, is the true visionary behind the future of the Sterling Nexus. Her work, her courage, and her integrity are the embodiment of what this company was founded on and what it will be again. He held up his phone, displaying the title page of her presentation for the cameras to see. "The real vision for the Nexus is this," he declared, "and its architect deserves to lead it." He then did two things in quick succession. He publicly fired Harrison Vance for corporate espionage and intellectual property theft. Then, still looking into the camera, his voice filled with a conviction that left no room for doubt, he made his final move. "Therefore, I am creating a new division at Sterling Innovations, effective immediately, the Human-Centered Design Division. And I can think of no one better to lead it. Jane Reed, if you are watching, I would like to formally and publicly offer you the position of director of this new division, with the full authority and resources you need to bring your vision to life." In her apartment, Jane was on her feet, tears streaming down her face, her hands pressed against her mouth. It was a moment of impossible, breathtaking vindication. The world had been turned right side up again. The press exploded, investors buzzed, and the board was thrown into chaos, but the message was clear. The king had reclaimed his throne, and he had just crowned his new queen. Later that evening, long after the media storm had begun to churn, he came to her apartment. There were no secrets between them anymore. He stood in her doorway, no longer the untouchable CEO, but just a man, his eyes full of apology and admiration. "I'm sorry, Jane," he said, his voice raw. "I'm sorry for the silence, for what they put you through. My hands were tied by the board. I had to wait for the right moment to act, to make a move they couldn't counter." She understood. She saw the fight he had been waging on his own front. She simply nodded, the tears starting again, this time from relief. He stepped inside, closing the door on the rest of the world, and they finally talked, not as boss and consultant, but as equals, as partners who had weathered a terrible storm and come out the other side, stronger and irrevocably bound together. They agreed to start again, with no rules, no secrets, just the honest, undeniable truth of their connection. 6 months later, the sterile glass walls of the Sterling Innovations boardroom felt different. They were the backdrop for Jane Reed's confident, energetic presentation. As the director of the Human-Centered Design Division, she now commanded the room with an easy authority born not of title, but of earned respect. Her team, a vibrant collection of innovators she had handpicked, listened with rapt attention. Her old chipped caffeine and confidence mug still sat on her new spacious desk, but right next to it was a brand new one, identical in every way, a quiet, thoughtful gift that had appeared one morning. When the meeting concluded to a round of enthusiastic applause, she saw him waiting for her by the door, a soft, proud smile on his face. John looked more relaxed than she had ever seen him, the weary weight in his eyes replaced by a warm, easy light. He held up 2 plane tickets. "I was thinking the Italian coast," he said, his voice a low, happy murmur meant only for her. 2 weeks, and I have a new rule I'd like to propose." She raised an eyebrow, a playful smile touching her lips. "Oh? And what's that?" "Absolutely no laptops allowed," he said, his eyes twinkling. She laughed, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. Together, they walked out of the boardroom, past the executive offices and into the elevator, leaving the company, their company, in capable hands. As they stepped out of the building and into the bright, warm embrace of the Austin sun, they were no longer a secret, no longer defined by their roles or their pasts. They were just Jane and John, equals in every way, walking side by side into a future they had built together.